President Grimson, to colleagues, to those of you from all across the Arctic gathered here at the Arctic Circle Assembly, it is indeed a great opportunity to be here, a great opportunity to be back. Olafur, thank you. Thank you for your vision, what you have created here in these spaces. I understand that this is the largest assembly to date. I missed last year because of that little election thing that we had. But we are on the other side of that and moving forward. But I think back to some of the initial assemblies here at HARPA. Initially, the participation from the United States was perhaps a bit sparse. We were a pretty tight-knit group of Arctic regulars. It was people like Dave Balton and Mike Sfraga and John Farrell, myself. There were some more, but we were a tight-knit group there. And so to be together with a robust contingent from the United States, from public and private sectors and across Alaska. The regulars are here, Mike and David and John and me, but we also are joined by our Assistant Secretary of Energy for International Affairs, Dr. Andrew Light, our Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Iris Ferguson, Coast Guard leadership and the crew of the Healy, students, researchers, and just general Arctic enthusiasts. So it's good. It is a good reunion. And I'm very encouraged that the United States and our interest in the Arctic is now clearly visible. America has finally appreciated that we are an Arctic nation, and our vision for the region is slowly but surely taking shape. And it's been a bit of a struggle, I have to be honest there. When you're pushing that rock uphill, it can take some work. But our vision is still that work in progress. It's far from perfect, it's missing some components, but I think that we've turned the corner from talking about getting policy and personnel in place to mostly having them in place and being able to shift our focus now to implementation and real-world leadership. And I want to talk for just a moment about what we have put in place before I turn to what I think comes next. Despite what you're reading in the media, Congress actually has been able to do a little bit of legislating. I'm sure that it seems like we just lurch from one crisis to another because, in fact, that's what we are doing. You see our federal government come to the brink of default and the potential for a shutdown and then pull back. You see the Speaker's chair currently vacant. You see the rank partisanship that is really paralyzing our politics and polarizing our people. And all of that is hard. It's hard for people like me, but despite all of that, in the midst of all of it, we have been able to agree on major legislation that provides unprecedented support for our Arctic priorities. As a result of our bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed a couple years ago, we are making historic investments for the basic necessities of modern life, and this is everything from water and sewer to broadband. This is going to help ensure our Arctic residents can enjoy a 21st century standard of living while living in their homelands. We're doing more to build out sustainable, resilient communities in the face of climate change through both the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. We're seeing real, tangible, on the ground or in the water investments. We're building our first deep draft Arctic port in Nome. We've fully funded 2 icebreakers. We've approved appropriations for a third, and we're moving closer to acquiring a commercially available vessel. We now have more 5th-generation fighter jets in Alaska than anywhere else. We've enhanced our long-range discrimination radar and our missile defense. So from infrastructure to climate resilience to national defense, Congress has stepped up in the Arctic. And our legislation is drawing attention even some envy from our peers. In most instances, Congress's attention to the Arctic is being matched by the Biden administration. And here, I want to single out last year's U.S. national security strategy. This offered unprecedented priorities and established a whole of government focus for the region. This document has given practical purpose to the Department of Defense's Arctic-related strategies and efforts, including unilateral defense requirements, binational advancements with NORAD, and a new era for the Arctic role and leadership of NATO. And beyond that, DoD's newest regional center, something I'm very proud of, the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies, continues to take root in Anchorage while growing a global network of Arctic partners and activities, including here this week, that you will see many of them. And then the 11th Airborne Division, the first unit in DoD history to have a nationally designated Arctic mission, leads the U.S. military in pioneering our operational capabilities in the region. The National Security Strategy also supports our State Department's role in Arctic diplomacy, foreign affairs, and regional leadership. Hopefully, we're going to have soon an Alaskan serving as the first U.S. ambassador for the Arctic at large. Outside of defense and diplomacy, the Department of Energy published its inaugural Arctic strategy just last October. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory has a growing campus in Fairbanks through our former Cold Climate Housing Research Center. And the reconstituted Arctic Energy Office is living up to its motto to bring the Arctic to DOE and DOE to the Arctic in areas like microgrids and critical minerals. Coordinating all of these activities is the revived Arctic Executive Steering Committee, which provides guidance to our federal agencies and departments, and just released its implementation strategy for the Arctic on Tuesday. And I know you've already heard those highlights from Ambassador Bolton. The executive branch of the U.S. government now has a strategy and a mission for the U.S. Arctic. And while I think it is weak, remarkably weak with respect to resource development, I do support it in most all other places. And ultimately, there's no question that nearly across the board, the United States has leveled up its commitment in the Arctic. So our challenge now is to move out on this while filling out the remaining gaps, addressing the new challenges, and to build on the progress that we've made. And so here's what I see next, which is kind of phase 2, if you will. And that is implementation, providing the resources to get our new laws and strategies right. And that's a significant undertaking, but we need to complement it by advancing our Arctic priorities anywhere that we can. So take the Farm Bill, for example. This is legislation that is in process in both the House and the Senate. We can use it to prioritize Arctic food security by expanding programs to support nascent industries like mariculture and focusing on more unique opportunities like reindeer husbandry and herding. We also need to expedite long-stalled federal actions like the creation of the Shipping Federal Advisory Committee, which has taken 6 years and counting, but is absolutely an imperative as shipping increases through the Bering Straits. We need to ratify the Law of the Sea Treaty. I talk about it every time I come. The U.S. may already abide by it, but really, our lack of approval here could cost us valuable territory and resources and more. We must do that. We need to focus free trade in the Arctic, which will boost growth and development in all of our nations. Another aspect is expanded visa eligibility, which we're pushing for, with Iceland in particular, to facilitate visits and business in the United States. And we will need to address the two elephants in the room: Russia's absence from it and China's presence in it, and the threats each presents to the rules-based order that must prevail in the Arctic. Both Russia and China raise a new set of risks for the Arctic. One for Alaska is the non-polar code compliant tankers that Russia is using to ship oil to China and elsewhere, which I find simply unacceptable. And I would respectfully suggest to our Chinese counterparts that you do have leverage on Moscow, and you could easily put a stop to that troubling development. Now, all of us are wary of Russia and China, but I would remind you that 7 is greater than 2, both in math and in the Arctic. Some suggested the pause for most Arctic Council activities necessitated by Russia's awful war in Ukraine would be the end of Arctic governance, but it's been anything but that. With the Arctic 7 closer than ever, more aligned than ever, Finland joining NATO, and Sweden next in line. We can also be thankful that the Arctic parliamentarians who met earlier this week here in Iceland have continued our important work together on regional affairs. So I've outlined a lot here today, but I want to close with my top priority, which remains the people of the Arctic. Later this afternoon, I'm going to be speaking virtually with the Alaska Federation of Natives. Their convention is underway in Anchorage right now, and whenever I speak with them, whenever I visit them in their homes or their communities, I'm reminded of the strength that is gained in listening to their knowledge and understanding of the land and its resources. Their knowledge needs to be reflected in our priorities. We've started by incorporating indigenous ways of knowing, which increasingly identify, define, and guide whole of government responses to Arctic challenges and opportunities. There's significant value in that, but it's only the beginning. In rural Alaska, we face some tremendous challenges related to subsistence, to housing, the cost of living, the impacts of climate change. Wildfires are growing worse. Stronger storms are damaging our coasts. Invasive species are arriving. Permafrost melting, sea ice receding. We also have the concern of outmigration that so many in Arctic areas face. Outmigration from our remote communities where we can't reasonably expect our young people to stay if they don't feel connected to the world. Mental health issues, particularly suicide among young people. These are some of the very, very pressing issues facing the Arctic. How do we build the infrastructure, the capacity that we need? How do we prepare for an uncertain future? How do we keep our young people around? The U.S. has started with major legislation that will help connect the Arctic to the rest of the world. Modern living connected by fast internet, flights out, ways back in, and reasons to stick around. But ultimately, this is going to be an area where our Arctic partnership really matters. Now, I may recognize that the U.S. was perhaps the last step up into the far north, but know that our commitment will endure. Our laws are solid, our strategies are meaningful, we're serious about them, and the implementation is well underway. We have a lot to be proud of in the United States, but the final piece of our strategy is recognizing that we aren't America alone. We have strong partners in the Arctic with many of the same opportunities that we have and facing many of the same challenges we face. So for as much as we have put in place, international cooperation is at the center of America's new vision for the Arctic. And as I look out in this room, I'm grateful to see so many of the partners ready to keep the Arctic stable, secure, and thriving, a place on the planet that can, with hard work and leadership and cooperation, remain exceptional. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be back with you all.